everybody, I'm Maritza Barone, and this is the Things You Can't Unhear podcast. Has there ever been a moment in your life where you heard or read or were told something that you simply could not unhear? Something that caused you to make positive changes so that you could become the best version of yourself? Well, we share this show with access to inspiring and empowering humans who will motivate you to become the happiest, healthiest, kindest, and most compassionate you. Sit back, settle in, and let this be the day you hear something that simply cannot be unheard. Hello and welcome back to Things You Can't Unhear. This is Maritza Barone, your host and creator of the show, and this is episode 115. Those numbers are getting up there. These conversations are getting deeper and deeper and more important, and I'm so happy that you're here to hear this one, because it will change you in some way. We have Div Pillay on the show. She's one of those people who has more drive than a Ferrari, and she's on a mission to change the way people think, feel, and behave when it comes to diversity and inclusion, and most specifically race and cultural inclusion. And she uses her lived experiences living under radically segregated apartheid laws and growing up in a dangerous part of South Africa where she survived a 10-hour kidnapping, then relocating to a new community in Australia as a new mum in a country where she was a complete minority, trying to secure a job where she was valued, as experiences that opened her eyes to be able to see what work needed to be done, to have better systems and practices that create more equal workforces and societies. Divanisha, Div, which she now calls herself, is the influential leader and CEO of MindTribes and the social enterprise Culturally Diverse Women. She's also the chair of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee at the American Chamber of Commerce Australia and is a board director of VicHealth. We are definitely in good hands here today. In addition to this, she's the host of the popular and highly rated Business in Colour podcast, alongside the phenomenal Sadhna Smiles, who has also been on this podcast and shared her unique story with us. I've worked with Div to help bring many podcasts to life, including Business in Colour, plus a Gender Equality Commission podcast, and Austrade's Study Australia, Series 1 and 2. Her mission is loud and clear, not only to share her voice and other voices on these platforms, but to create change on a large scale. And if you haven't heard Div speak before, you are in for a mind shift and an opportunity to create positive change within your life, within your organization, your workforce, and beyond. She is a force to be reckoned with. She's kind yet powerful, and she's nurturing yet strong. Enjoy the change maker that is Div Pillay. And if you'd like to discuss creating your own podcast, getting to your own core message, and sharing your unique voice to the world because you have something important to say, please reach out to me. The podcasts that I love producing are those that create the biggest impact. And I can help hold your hand through the entire process, from finding that core message, the confidence to use that voice, and building the technical side, distributing and producing your podcast on all platforms far and wide. Well, hello, Div Pillay. Welcome to Things You Can't Unhear. What a work in progress it has been to get you here today.
I know. I think it's probably been about 6 months coming or more. I can't even track how many times we've rescheduled this conversation. So thanks for sticking with me, Marissa.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's actually been much more than 6 months in my own head, because I remember the first time you called me and told me all about the incredible work that you're doing. And since then, I have been following your journey, helping you to produce these incredible podcasts that help so many people out there in the diversity and inclusion space. And I am so pleased to work by your side on all of these different incredible platforms that you create. So This is going to be a great chat, everyone. You're going to love Div Pillay and what she brings to the table. I promise you that. So let's talk about, firstly, Div, what experiences made you the person that you are today? So where did you grow up? Give us a bit of an insight into your childhood.
I suppose my childhood really was pretty ordinary by South African Indian standards. So it feels extraordinary when I tell it in an Australian context or a Western context. But, if any South African Indian people listen to it, my life will pretty much seem a mirror of theirs. For the audience who may not be familiar with South African history, I grew up in the apartheid era, which is South Africa's legacy of legalized racial discrimination. And what that meant is that we had laws that restricted where we lived, where we worked, what access we had to health, to legal justice systems, etc. So everything was predicated off our race. So we grew up with a harsh law called the Group Areas Act, which caused us to live in a bubble. And in some ways, it kept us united in our heritage. So I grew up in an Indian area with, Indian people all around. We managed to build temples and schools. We managed to retain fast festivals. Not language, though. Language we had to give up, or some of us gave up language because the Dutch insisted, again, as a way to strip out our identity. We all had to speak Afrikaans and we had to learn Afrikaans. So ek het praat die taal, which is so funny to hear from, a small Indian-looking woman. And, it's a bit of my way of, when people tell me I speak good English, I then bring out my Afrikaans just as a way to, rock their boat and disrupt their thinking anyway. But we lost language. So I can't actually speak Tamil, which is my mother tongue language, and I can't pass it on to my children, which is even more challenging, because my father was very strict in wanting us to speak really proper English. He was an English professor, and he wanted us to not get hurt by speaking our mother tongue outside, because people would be beaten or reprimanded in public if you heard any other language other than Afrikaans or English being spoken. So it's a pretty harsh upbringing, but in a way, the positives out of it was that it kept our community together. It kept our focus on things that would get us, in reflection, progressed as a community. So our focus was on education. We received a small stipend after Mahatma Gandhi came and fought for Indians in South Africa, where we had a small stipend from the government to actually have Indian schools. And there's a joke in South Africa that Indian people were either accountants, business people, or teachers. And both my parents were teachers because they saw it as a way to bring up a community generation on generation. So they taught and they instilled in us the passion for education, but also the purpose of education to pull you further along in your progress as an individual. So there was a high focus on education, which I still hold as a value today, and I pass on to my children. So for all the negativity and all the harshness and all the hurt and all the struggle, there were things that I take out in terms of value that I keep today. So that's my sort of upbringing. So again, if South African Indians are listening to it, I'm like, yeah, pretty much that was our upbringing as well. But it's,
it's interesting. As a child, you probably felt quite sheltered and protected by your bubble and your family and what they had put into place for you. But I suppose as you get older, you start to make these realizations and going, hang on a minute, that's not right. That's not fair. There needs to, something needs to change. You've obviously had those realizations as you got older. Do you remember the effect that this had on you when you had these realizations?
Oh gosh, yeah. I remember there's two things that shifted my mindset fast. The first was in university, where, there was such this push to get good scores and achieve the best you can possibly achieve. So when I did all the hard work in high school to get this final leaving score that was, the best I could possibly produce. And still, I couldn't get into the courses that I wanted to, because within university, so I came out of school when it was leading up to the first democratic election. So there was already an uprising from Black activists to free Nelson Mandela. He was in prison for 27 years, and there was this mood of potential change. And I came out high school when there was this looming piece of actually there being a change of government, that there was going to be this push to get a Black government in power, Nelson Mandela being released. So when I got to that stage, I was still, my first year of university was still in a typically white university. So they would take people in, but even if you were a person of color, there was a restriction on what you could choose and where you could go. So for example, my husband was the first person on scholarship to Rand Afrikaans University. He was the first person of color in mechanical engineering. He was just one person in there. And so, if I pushed, I couldn't get the courses that I wanted to. So I took the best of what I could get, and I did a Bachelor of Social Science, which, when people ask, when you do mentoring of young people and things like that, they ask you, oh, why did you choose what you wanted to, why did you make those choices? And I go, well, my story was limited. My choices were limited or curtailed. So I felt that was very unfair. That was my first realization of, hang on a minute, I've just worked my butt off to get this score. And sorry, you're telling me that I can't compete fairly? I can't get entrance into what I want to do. And I wanted to do, either speech pathology or something in the sciences, and I couldn't get in. And I found that this is wrong. Like, first time, I was like, yeah, I put in all this effort, what the hell? So at first, the first thing that hit me as an individual. And so the second moment was in 1998, August. I got taken with my car with 3 Black men, and I was hijacked. And again, I was abducted for 10 hours. But again, it seems like harsh in Western context, but in a South African context, I was just one of those Indian women who was taken, because it was at that point in 1998, so post 1994 democratic elections, there was this uprising of the have and have-nots, and the Indian people had grown to a middle class through the power of education and getting, stable enough jobs. And we had acquired homes and things like that. And there was this anger from the Black community, who at that point had not gained access to any formal education. So there was literacy levels that were really low. That, yes, it was a Black government and jobs were available, but if people didn't have literacy or skills, they couldn't get those jobs. So it was this mood of anger, and there was lashing out on people who had things, and there was this push out of poverty to take things. So I was taken with my car because they wanted the car first, but they also wanted to rob a store. So I was the person who could drive, because none of those 3 Black gentlemen could drive. So I was the driver. So that's what happened to me then in 1998. And I escaped only from, I would say, kind of staying power. I just stayed, and I never got out of a car that they wanted me to get out of. I just stayed. I hooked my arms around the steering wheel and my legs below the accelerator and the brake. And I was 47 kilos then, so kind of, really light, really tiny. And I just didn't move. I just refused to get out of a vehicle, because I was asked to drive into an informal settlement, which most of the cases then, when you hear about Indian women going into informal settlement, they don't come out. So in my head, I was very steadfast about not getting out of the car, and I just stayed. So I was really quite steely determined. And no matter how they punched me in the face or pulled me, I didn't move. I had my seatbelt on, an old banged up VW Golf government vehicle, my first job. And I knew how to take that seatbelt off. It was such a broken down car that they just tried to jiggle it, and they had one knife between them and couldn't cut the seatbelt fast enough. And they just didn't move. And then an older gentleman was coming back after work, and black gentleman though, he flashed his lights and he honked his horn, and they got scared as young people and they ran off. So for me, in that moment, I saw the worst of humanity and then the best of humanity. And this older black gentleman, I passed out at that point, and he sat with me until I came to. So he was prepared to stay, to look after me, or watch over me, that no one else came to the car. So for me, though, that moment was a critical moment. It taught me a lot about myself and my own resilience, but it also made me steadfast to remember, and I remember this every day that I wake up, is that I really only got one life. That's it. And I better make a good impact with it. Otherwise, I'm not getting a second chance at this. This is one moment. In my mid-40s, I think I've got to really make enough impact on other people's lives, because I feel like I was given a second chance. So I have to keep going. So that is a big moment.
Oh,
I was young,
a
so
huge
23.
moment. And
Yeah.
you're a fighter, you're a survivor. And, we have these moments in our lives, I call them life-defining key moments that shape who we become. And I love that you've gotten the lessons from that experience and use them to fuel yourself to make change and create impact through the work that you're doing. And, you've used the trauma and turned the pain into purpose, which is what so many successful, amazing people do, that we remember in history, because these are the experiences that we need in our lives sometimes to give us that push to make these impactful moves that so many other people remember.
There's little choices all the way there, coming out of something traumatic and trying to get to the purpose and the passion aligned, because it's very easy to actually shelter yourself. It's very easy to retreat from any challenge, to say, you know what, I've had enough. Like, I'm just going to do what is easy. I follow an easy path. And I got so many signals after that, or not even signals. Like, my mother was very clear that she didn't want me to leave the house. She wanted me just to go to work and back. She didn't want me to do anything that was potentially risky. And I didn't listen to her, and I did what I wanted to do. And I think I just want your audience to know that it took a lot of work to try and live up to that decision, to say, I need to do something more than myself. But it's very hard, because you've got your own sort of personal challenges to work through, how you see yourself, how you recover from it. So it takes a lot of work. It took me a long time. And I'm still working on it. It's not as if it's like a done or a finished thing. But I think also talking about it openly, which I couldn't do in the South African Indian community, because it was something that was shameful. People didn't want you to say, oh, Indian girl taken by 3 black guys. Don't talk about that. It's not very good for marriage proposals, or not very good to keep talking about it. So you got to go against that and think, okay, do I not listen to people who are elder people in my community? I was very young, so 23, very, very hard to stand up to that kind of challenge. But I kept going. I can see in retrospect, I did the right things by myself. But when I was in it, it was not easy.
So many of us do tend to suppress experiences that we've been through and shy away from them, because it is difficult to verbalize and relive and experience those harsh, traumatic moments in our lives that do shape us, but you have done an amazing job. And like you said, it is always a work in progress. It is not an overnight miracle where you have these realizations and know what's coming next. But you've done it in such a progressive way. And we're going to dig into that journey a bit further. I thank you so much for sharing that with us. I think a lot of us will get so much from hearing the resilience within that piece as well. So moving from South Africa was obviously a decision you made at some point in your 20s. Tell us about what caused that decision.
Well, I suppose leaping off that, I got married. We thought about leaving South Africa many, many times because of the ensuing violence. It just got more and more and more. And it was to the point where, first it was, okay, it was my incident. And then you chalk it up to, okay, that was a terrible incident. But then it happened more and more to people we knew. Like every week there would be somebody we knew, our family members. And it was in Durban, it was violent crime. It was really, people were physically getting hurt. So at that point, we had an opportunity because of my husband's family. We're in Australia. We had this opportunity to put in for a permanent residency, and we didn't even research any other countries to go to because we had a safety net in having some family members. We put it in. And at that stage, not the case now, we applied on a skilled migration visa, and we actually got it quite quickly within a year or 15 months or something. But it came through at a time where I was already a couple of months pregnant. I was four months pregnant or something, early pregnancy. And we had this decision where we would we'd have to stall that decision and reapply as a family, which was another complication. And we would have to, then we would kind of throw it up in the air and hope to God that we got another shot at entering Australia, or we could leave right then and make sure that our son was born in Australia and become the first Australian citizen in our family. So we took that option, much to our family's annoyance, because they were all waiting for this baby to be born. And after all of those, traumatic moments, it was something to celebrate. But we took this harder path, and within 3 weeks we had sold everything and packed up everything. In the following kind of 3 weeks we were out. So I was 6 months pregnant getting on that Qantas flight, only having come to Australia once over a week into Perth and stamping my passport. And so I didn't know anything about living here, working here, nothing. I had met my one sister-in-law once when she came to the wedding and didn't know her at all. So it came purely out of opportunity and hope for something different. And I don't regret my decision or our decision at all. We have 3 beautiful children now. Our son marks our time here. So he is 19, he will turn 20 in March. And every time I look at him, I think, okay, he's our decision. And every time I look at our 2 girls, I go, yes, that was the right decision. Every time I look at the one key that is the key to our front door, I say, thank you, gosh, we did the right thing. Because when I think about South Africa and all the security you need, barbed wire fences, guards coming in, infrared lights every day, hoping that nothing happens to you, that kind of stress and pressure we do not have for 20 years, which is an amazing life. So yeah, that was our decision, literally very quick. Not really thinking things through about every single permutation, but going with just opportunity and just leaving. And we did, yeah.
You did it and you don't regret it. You know what? You and I have had several conversations over the course of knowing each other where you have been really concerned and worried about your family back in South Africa when things have, become quite messy again and dangerous. And, it probably takes you back to that moment going, I feel safe here, but a lot of my heart is still there.
Yeah, that's a kind of extended level of stress for 20 years that I have. But I mean, it's nowhere near what my mom and my sister and her children go through every day. But it's this kind of I suppose like having like this mild headache constantly, like you just have this all the time looming over. And if I can't get hold of them, or something goes on, and I've got to reach out, and the only thing I can do is use the buying power of the Australian dollar to solve something, get some sort of short-term kind of happiness or joy that I can put in. I often would send my mum and my sister for a little spa or something that they would never be able to afford, but it's a little hiatus from all the madness, or paying from my sister's extra large security gate, automated gate, so she doesn't have to get off from the car and open a gate, because that's a hijacking moment for she's a single mom. So those little things that I can do, that better phones so that they can have good Wi-Fi, so if they have to call in an emergency, that they've got it. So I can only do things like that where the Australian dollar means a lot in the South African economy. But yeah, carry that extra stress level, which I know that thousands and thousands of migrants, I think it's like kind of 1 in 4 migrants in Australia who actually have parents, families, people in developing countries that are either war-torn or really going through struggle during COVID. I mean, there's thousands and thousands of stories like that. I think we all carry that kind of head and heart in different places, and also in a way a subtle guilt or remiss every time you have a bit of joy. You go, oh, like I'm okay, but everyone else is not. I sometimes don't even share all the photos of all the things that we are doing, because I feel like it's just such in a way, a guilty pleasure of something that I can do, which I know they'll be very happy that we're doing it, but I just know that they haven't for years been able to do that, or even to get on a plane or do any of that kind of thing. So yeah, it's a bit hard, but I know that many people go through it on a daily basis too. Afghanistan and Ukraine, all of the wars of late. It's difficult, I think, to manage your everyday.
You're all heart, Divanisha. I said I was going to call you Divanisha today. You are beautiful. So when you moved to Australia, how were you greeted? How did you settle into the community here?
Oh, now I probably might offend some very privileged mummies in Paran, but look, this was my experience 20 years ago. But I found it hard to just be. I was the only migrant in my mum's group, and a lot of the mums were, of course, Australian born and well settled and had a lot of support around them, and were able to stay at home as long as they wanted to, because they had partners who were working and earning money and allowing them to have their fancy breakfasts and lattes. I learned to drink a latte. Or I learned to order a latte. Oh, I didn't really learn to order. I just copied whatever everyone else was ordering so I could kind of fit in. But it was good to get out to these mums groups, because it actually got me out with a newborn, but it was really quite distanced. I couldn't tell my story at all because it was so different from everyone else. So I kind of just managed with the platitudes of, how are you doing? Oh yeah, and let's just talk about the heartache of not sleeping or battling with a newborn or whatever it is. And I kind of just said what was palatable to say. But for me, it was that plus everything else that I was going through as well. So it was a bit hard to do that. And also, dealing then now 20 years ago with a maternal child health nurse who didn't understand all of the other things that I was going through as well. So that was pretty difficult. And, there's been a lot of change in that sector now, with the number of migrant women who have babies in suburbs, and the support is so much better. But 20 years ago, it was really not great. And I was in Paran, where, you know, that affluent kind of group was really not my group. So it was really hard. And my husband got a job in Williamstown as an engineer with ExxonMobil. So he was traveling very early in the morning, and I was stuck at home with a baby with no support. So I was really out of my depth. And the only support people, the adults who I was talking to, didn't know who I was and didn't get me. So that was difficult. And then I kind of pulled myself out of that. And then about 10 months, when my son was about 10 months old, I tried the job market, and all I knew to do was to apply through Seek and send my resume and things like that. And, you know, my first experience of the fact that my resume was different and wasn't quite received well was from recruiters who, you know, kept overemphasizing the fact that I needed to get local Australian experience. And it was like a chicken and egg thing for me. I was like, okay, how do I get local Australian experience if I've just arrived here, just had a baby, trying to get back in? I've actually got transferable skills. So it was really quite bizarre managing through that job search, because it was just, I think a lot of migrants will go through the same thing still even today. I got a lot of conflicting advice about what to do. You know, I dropped the long name. I tried to sell my international experience in valuable terms to the Australian market. And look, I had been a recruiter in an agency in South Africa during one of the most complex periods in South Africa's history, you know, moving to affirmative action and really trying to advise and consult with things that actually are only 20 years now emerging in the diversity and inclusion space, things about targets and quotas and affirmative action and recruiting with a diversity and equality and inclusion lens. You know, I just think I had done that in a very, very complex market. Actually, it was, you know, pretty game changing if I was welcomed into the Australian market then, because my thinking was already there. Yet, you know, a developing country like South Africa, with all its tumultuous history, was kind of scorned. It wasn't like a country that was valued in terms of experience. So I had to really start again, which was hard because I had thrown away sort of 7 years of professional experience, and I'm starting rock bottom right at the entry level. So the only job that I got was I was a casual in that same agency that I went for a proper job for. I was a casual person just screening resumes. So they wouldn't even let me talk on the phone to candidates. I just had to wade through the resumes and put a short list in for someone who is actually quite junior as a recruitment consultant. So I had no voice. So they just thought, oh, you know, my accent and me talking to people, if I didn't have any Australian experience, I couldn't even help candidates. And yet I thought, oh my gosh, I can help a lot of candidates here, especially the migrant ones. But yeah, I was relegated just to doing kind of like an inbox activity of screening resumes. So that was pretty hard, sucking it up and shutting up and feeling
you didn't
like
do that for long, though,
invisible.
did you?
No, I didn't. No one could get me shut up for long.
Exactly. You have not sucked it up for long, and you are out there. You've created MindTribes, and I want people to know all about MindTribes and how it helps other people who were sitting in that seat that you are, and shifting them from that position into something more powerful. Can you share with us how MindTribes began and what you do there?
Oh, thank you for that sort of shout out of our business. It's kind of like my fourth child, to be honest. It's almost 10 years old, which, you know, for me, just the staying power in itself in this industry is a good thing to celebrate. But MindTribes is a diversity and inclusion consultancy. Our specialist area is race and cultural inclusion. We do diversity and inclusion very differently. Because we take a very systems-based approach to it. So I'm interested in actually reducing structural bias. And what I mean by that is that we actually, to welcome and attract talent in, we actually need to look at how those job ads are crafted, how those job descriptions or job roles are designed. So for example, if we say we want more women in, we need to be able to attract them in from that job ad. So if you have things on your job ad that are actually pretty much in the job spec or criteria is still attracting a man more often to the role because of the way that you structure the criteria, like, 20 years in the sector, this kind of experience. Access to that kind of resume or criteria could only be for people who are already privileged and already in the sector. If you're going to say, look, I want to welcome diversity in, then you're going to have to open that playing field right out. You're going to have to say, I want different sectors. I want, people with different types of experience that can still do the outcome to the job. But actually, I'm not going to set this bar the same as it was before. I'm going to change the bar. And it's not lowering the bar. It's actually just changing the way that you attract that experience in, because you want diversity of thinking. And if you say you do, then you should think diversely from the get-go. So we are interested in those systems because I love it when people say, yep, we want more women in, we want more people of color in, we want to represent the communities that we serve. I go, great, give me a typical job ad for a role that you're recruiting for now. Give me the interview questions that you ask them in an interview. Let me speak to the interviewing panel. Let me speak to the, one or two women that you've got already, or people of color that you've got already. Let me ask them how their experience is. And I go, ba-bom, ba-bom, ba-bom. Okay, none of these systems, the way you recruit, select, onboard, develop, promote, is actually free of some of those biases. So unless you strip that out, you're just playing a tokenistic game of thinking, having good intent, but actually not attracting and retaining the right talent in your business anyway. And this big, holy, sort of philosophical idea of representing the communities that you serve or customers that you serve is just that. It's just a philosophy. It isn't actually in practice. So our business works really from a systems structural perspective, audit, change management, linking into strategy. So if it's customers or communities, or that you want in terms of your strategic intent, then you have to design it like that. You have to work hard at getting it right. And we're very measurement focused. So not in terms of representation. Representational diversity is for me, good, that's great. You can set a number or a figure. I'm more interested in the qualitative lived experience of inclusion. Do people who are different, actually experience less bias every year on year that they are in your business? Do they feel more respected? Is their voice really heard as it should be, or is their voice curtailed? So a lot of people who are diverse come in and they learn, or they norm that, you know what, nobody wants my disruptive idea, even though they go, yep, we want your diverse thinking, bring it. It's not ready. The environment's not ready. And they get so many signals that tell them to stop talking the way they do, or stop innovating a different idea, or stop disrupting with a different thought. And then that diversity that you hired in is really managed out, and people just norm because it's a coping mechanism. So we look for all of those indicators because I don't want this to be tokenistic or programmatic work. It needs to be deep, meaningful change. And that's what we do every single day, which makes me very happy. And we don't work with clients who are not ready for that kind of work. I actually say, look, I don't think you're ready. So I'll have a couple of conversations, or we'll do a little bit of the audit focus, and the audit really tells me whether they're ready for it or not. And parallel to that, we have a social enterprise for culturally diverse women that I run. I run a flagship program, a masterclass program that focuses on career mobility of these women. They're professional women. They might be from a migrant or refugee asylum seeker background, but they are qualified, they are capable, and they might likely be sitting in the middle of an organization trying to get promoted up into leadership. So my main aim there is to teach them how to navigate when the systems are not open and inclusive, because this is the hard work. I'm doing the work at the organizational context, but still what is the lived experience of people is that the organization is not open enough to welcoming them into leadership levels, but they still have an aspiration. So I work at good advocacy and allyship. So they all select strategic senior people who then open those doors, even though the system is not open yet, even though the promotional criteria says one thing and they seemingly can't compete. This advocate says, hang on a minute, Div is great because I say she's great and I've seen her in action. So even though you want these sort of minutiae on your promotional criteria for the next leadership level, I say we give her a secondment. And you know what? Every single time that has worked. I've got more than 500 women who've been through our program. Every single time that advocate's word sort of derails these stock standard promotional criteria, just like men have done forever for other men, going, yeah, I think he's a great guy. I've seen him in action, vouch for him, give him a shot. And so we do. So I've been using that kind of influence to get these women where they need to be. So that I'm pretty proud of in terms of impact and outcome, that many women have been through our program and that many women have stepped into their leadership journeys, which is great.
Truly amazing, Div. And you're really breaking down that unconscious bias across the industries, across the boards, across corporations that really needs to be addressed. And on the back of that, there are so many platforms that you are creating. You are working on the fantastic podcast, Business in Color, which not only do I help you produce and edit, but I love to listen to. It is, I get so much out of it. I think I text you every now and then go, wow, okay, that episode was incredible. Everyone needs to listen to that. You produce a podcast for the Gender Equality Commission. You produce another podcast for Austrade and Study Australia series 1 and 2. It's just endless what you're doing, and you're speaking a lot more as well. You're getting that voice of yours out there. You're sharing this message far and wide in whatever way you can. The only thing I'm unsure about is how you get any rest whatsoever.
This is, our topic for discussion always, Marissa. And I know that you've had good counsel and wise words for me, which I try to take, but I only can take them in short bursts. So I have to make sure that I can take this and make it a rhythm in my life to be able to actually get that restorative kind of rest and really break from the things that I'm doing. But I often do a lot of self-sacrificing, which is probably not the healthiest thing to do for the overarching purpose of giving to other people. It's always been my default that I go, oh, yes, I'm tired, but gosh, if I do this, what an impact it'll make for hundreds and thousands of people. Let me do that. So I've got to get good at doing that. You'll be happy to know that I've booked a week in Cairns. So this is a good thing. I feel like it's a report card, a scorecard that you got up for me, Maritza, that I have to report to Maritza and tell her what I'm doing.
You must meditate. You must just take a quiet tea break on your own. Let your thoughts just collect themselves. Like, I know you have such a mission and you're so powered by this mission and it fuels you to keep on going. But we always say we've got to put that oxygen mask on ourselves before we can help anyone else. So I'm glad you've taken that on board and mentioned it. But what does motivate you? What is that driving force that keeps you going even when you are exhausted?
I think it is the change in people's lives. It's very simple, and it is making scalable change. So all the podcasts that we produce, while it's beautiful for the guests in themselves to tell their story, and it in many ways for many of our guests, it's the first time that they are sharing something personal about themselves or their journey, which I think every single guest that's walked away from our Business in Color podcast that you so beautifully produced for us has said that to us, going, it was just such a restorative conversation to be able to really authentically share who I am. And shout out to my fabulous co-host, Sadhna Smiles, who, we just trust each other in a conversation to be able to curate this story beautifully. So what I take away from that is when those podcasts are aired every Thursday, I get so many people who just say hearing someone like them talk about this story has empowered them to tell their own story, or it has really validated some of the things that has been unspoken or invisible. And it's given them a window into saying, you know what, I can get comfortable with myself, or I can share my story with someone else, so we can really be honest about who I am. Now that for me is scalable change. And I've been able to do that also, or we've been able to do that with the podcast with the number of allies and advocates who don't really understand what the lived experience of someone is who is excluded. on a daily basis in the workplace, in community, in society. And when they hear that, it actually teaches, it's a teaching moment. They really get a lot out of the storytelling, and it's educative. And I like that because they also learn from peers. So the number of allies and advocates we've had on there, like Adam Fennessy, like so many, we've had ex-CEO of Michelle, who's ex-CEO of Bank of Melbourne. We've had so many people who have shared their own leadership journeys, and allies and advocates have taken from that. It's a replicating behavior. They go, oh gosh, I can do that. If someone like that can do that, I can do that, and I can make a change for someone else. So I think the reason I do it is because of the impact outcome to individuals in this change that I'm trying to drive for more inclusion, more equity. It helps me also influence other people to get on board with it. So, sometimes I've been able to use the podcast as a way to start a conversation with someone who I know is tough. I sometimes say, you know what, listen to this podcast and then we'll have a chat about it. And it just is a door opener for me. So I've used it very cleverly in very different situations to influence people to get behind the change that they so desperately need to make in their worlds, in their businesses. So it's been a wonderful journey. And you've taught me how to podcast, really, Maritza. I didn't know a thing. I just knew how to talk about these issues. I didn't know how to produce a quality podcast. So much admiration back at you for teaching me so fast on what to do and how to do it.
99.9% of an amazing podcast is the voice behind it and the core message, Div. And you had that, you had the heart. And I'm working on this right now. Literally before we hit record, I was crafting words around this exact angle to help other people find that core message and deliver it with strength. And you do that so, so beautifully. But I want to ask you an emotional question. And you touched on this just a few minutes ago, where you said people don't know what it feels like to be a minority in a community, to feel excluded in a community and in society. What does it feel like?
It feels like you're invisible for that moment. It feels like you're alone. It feels like your voice is really like disempowered. And if it happens again and again, it drops your confidence in yourself, and you go into a retreat mode where you are not participating fully. And that's what hurts the most, is the diversity that people are seeking to invite in actually disassociates from participating. And cognitively, emotionally, it's in retreat mode. It's a concept a psychological concept that I talk about often. It's called the cover line. And if you can, visually imagine an iceberg, what's above the iceberg is very visible. So when I walk into a room, people know that I'm different, a different accent, different look, and often I'm walking into a room that's homogenous. It often is Anglo leaders, mainly male, born in Australia, bar one or two females. There's probably maybe 2 to 3 maximum. I'm the next female that comes across, but I don't look or sound or interact the same as the other females, and definitely not the males. So there's a big distance between me and everyone else in the room often. And the reason why I find myself in that room is because those are the decision makers that I need to get on side. So I put myself there, yes. But when you are excluded, it's seemingly unconscious, but a lot of it is very conscious. So my message is different. The way I frame my message is different. My thinking is different. So when I start to speak, I'm probably going to, the package is different and the words coming out is different. So there's often like a silence that comes after when I speak, where the rest of the group will carry on with the message or the content of what they're wanting to discuss. So they're prioritizing their own voices over mine. And there's this little distance. And then I have to have the courage to speak up again and again and again. And if I don't have that courage in that moment, it means that no one will invite me in again a second time around. And that is a constant struggle. I play that game every single day of working in this business, it's really draining. It's really draining. The only thing that fuels me is that I am my own person and I run my own business. And now it doesn't take me that long to speak up again if I'm dismissed. Because I go, you know what? I have a purpose here. I've got an overarching message and I'm going to not leave till I say that. And then I'm out. So I push myself back in there. But for people who are employed in a workplace, you can just see how this plays out again and again and again. And unfortunately, we are seeing definitely people of color, whatever you want to call us, and people push me on social media. Oh, you can't call us people of color. I'm like, okay, culturally and linguistically diverse. No, not that. That's pigeonholes us. Culturally diverse. No. And I go, oh gosh, I don't know what on the tin that you want me to call myself. Not a woman of color. I've got backlash on social media for calling myself a woman of color. So I just, whatever you want to call us, people of different racial and ethnic backgrounds, let's just say as a broad category of people. These people are often in workforce demographics. We look at large data sets. So a lot of our work is evidence-based. And you'll find that most workplaces have, let's say, about 20, maybe to 30% representation of people from different races and ethnic backgrounds, right? And interestingly, some workforce analytics still count being Australian or Anglo or European as ethnicity. So when you look at that, those numbers jump, right? If you had to take out Anglo, Caucasian, or European, those numbers drop. But any which way you cut that data, that 20, 30%, when you look at the distribution of where these people are, they definitely are in the entry-level roles. They are in team leader or supervisory roles, in specialist technical roles. So they're valued for their subject matter expertise, analysts, etc. But they just hit in small numbers the middle parts of leadership, so middle manager. If you look upwards from that, the story is the same. Public sector, private sector, not-for-profit sector, the picture is the same. Who sits on the board, who sits on the executive teams, in the general manager levels, executive director levels, director levels, you'll find maybe one, if that, two, maybe three, if at best you find some representation of different races and ethnicities other than Anglo or European. So that's my fight to fight, is that when you think about exclusion, it's happening pervasively to these people. When you think about leadership, those 1 to 3 people sitting at the top end of town, how do they feel? How do the people who are first line leaders, middle managers feel? Because they are, again, a minority in that team leadership group, right? How do their voices get heard? But those are the decision-making roles that decide on service design, on product design, on service delivery, out to a very multicultural audience. And you go, but they don't even make those decisions, right? And you can see that from even I always use the lockdown towers in Melbourne as a way to think about service delivery, right? Victorian police, armed guards and policemen locked down the towers in Melbourne. Victorian government senior decision makers decided to make that call to send those police there. What's the reaction response from the community? It took them back to war zones. It took them back to when they are fearful of police, letting them not enter their own homes, right, until they were checked. So nobody with a racially or ethnically different background made that decision, because all the heads of multicultural Victoria who make decisions like that are Anglo currently. So we go, okay, well, if you had to ask me, should we send armed guards? I would have said, no, I think we should hold back on that force, the excessive use of force. I think we should go and have community leaders empowered to go and talk to people about coronavirus and talk to them about the safety things that they need to do. People who look like them, who can speak their language, who can communicate in a way that's compassionate and empathetic. I don't think sending police to those properties are going to work, right? So simple thing, lived experience, very good. If you had representation in decision-making levels, you would have a quick decision from people. But yet it went so wrong. People, even suppliers of food in there, giving pork and other things to people who were Muslim in their care packages. Like, again,
So many.
Who made that decision? What goes in the box, right?
So many infuriating decisions that were made incorrectly in our opinion, and I'm sure many other opinions across that time. That is completely frustrating. And I'm riled up listening to all of this, and I know this is what drives you a lot as well to make this change. But how can people be better? Like if you had to deliver a couple of sentences to tell us, drive home this message, how can people be better?
I think first off, you need to actually, if you're not representative of the lived experiences of people who are excluded, I think you need to bring those voices in. Even if you don't have them represented in your leadership levels, I think you need to consult with the people who it affects the most. I see this happen either tokenistically or not at all, which is really harsh, right? So all the people who design and deliver diversity and inclusion programs, whether it's education or whatever it is, I often hear that they don't actually talk to the people who are excluded first. And that's where we begin as a business. I run qualitative listening sessions and I go, you tell me what exclusion feels like for you every day. I don't ask what a lot of D&I, diversity and inclusion leaders, ask on a survey, which is an annoying question, which is, do you feel like you belong, or do you feel like you were included here, in a survey response, right? Wrong question to ask. You should be asking people, when do you feel excluded? Which moments that matter make you feel excluded and why? How often does it happen? When does it happen? With who does it happen? Ask those questions that are tough to actually hear the answer for, and then you'll get your understanding of where you need to solve for. So what I would say in terms of advice is, please don't take your money or your dollars of your business and invest it in programmatic tokenistic work that doesn't have the clear measurement of changing the lived experience of people who feel exclusion for whatever reason, whether it's race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender, disability. Those are the people who, whatever you're doing, you need to involve them in the design. You need to involve their voices in the curation of the solution. Don't do it any other way around. Don't go, I hear so many times the question from leaders going, what's working currently? What kind of learning? What are other banks doing? What are other insurance doing? What are telcos are doing? Like, you shouldn't be asking a question. Write your own story. What do your people feel like, think like when they're experiencing exclusion? Start there and figure it out with them, hand in hand. I just feel like this work can get so far away from us and actually come up with some meaningless solutions when it doesn't actually solve for the people who are experiencing it on a day-to-day basis. And I feel that that's a simple thing to ask, but I just see it done badly every single time.
And also that old saying, walk a mile in someone else's shoes. Put yourself in their position, listen to their story, let them be heard, let them be seen, let them speak, let them share their voice. People say to me a lot on my podcast, I've had a few comments. They say, oh, you've got such a wonderful, diverse group of people's stories that you share. And I said, oh, do I? Like, it's not a tokenistic thing for me. It's a genuine interest to learn about other people and their stories. And I did look back one day and I thought, wow, there is a really lovely cross-section of people here. But definitely it was not a tokenistic thing on my behalf. And I'll continue to do that out of organic interest, intentional interest.
Yeah. And I think the more you do that humanistically, it becomes, the solutions come out of that humanistic connection, not the other way around. And you're guided by someone who tells you, yeah, now it's working, or I can feel it's working. And that cross-check of any solutions that I've seen in the D&I space doesn't ever happen. You go, oh gosh, here's a off-the-shelf program or workshop that we can do. Let's do it. So unconscious bias training is a typical one. $8 billion global industry year on year. We all do it. We all sat through one. And I go, what's the measure of that? Are we actually tracking whether people are reducing their unconscious bias in their decision making when it comes to people, when it comes to promotional opportunities for people, who goes on a secondment, who takes a project, who chairs a meeting with a senior audience, do we check whether people who have been on this unconscious bias training make better decisions and reduce their bias every single moment that they have an opportunity to do so? No, we don't. Most of that unconscious bias training lasts about 8 to 12 weeks maximum. You have a heightened awareness and you're looking, and then you don't do it. So I feel like you've got to check whether it causes a change in people's lived experience at work or not. And my critique of all of the programs always starts there. I go, has it caused a change in your life? That your leader's done unconscious bias training, and when they go, nah, haven't seen a thing that's different. I'm like, okay, yeah, that's not working, is it? So we have to change the game. So that for me is you've got to listen well, but you've also got to co-design. You've got to consistently measure, because we're asking people in the diversity and inclusion space to change their behavior, which is a hard thing to do, and it's a longitudinal thing to do, and it doesn't happen after one workshop or two. You've got to look for consistency, and that's what we do. We want to look for that systemic shift for good and scalable shift. So yeah, it's hard work, but I reckon because it's human beings, it's so easy to go back on your decisions or behavior, commitment. Like you commit to doing something and then you just don't do it.
And this is why you don't rest, because there's so much work still to be done. And I suppose the last few years have definitely shown some improvements, but there's still a long way to go.
Absolutely. So I'll keep going.
Keep going, and I'll be standing right by your side. Now, can you please tell us all where to find you? Because I'm sure there's a lot of executive teams who are listening to this and would want to jump into what MindTribes does and bring it on board for their own corporation. So please let us know how to find you, how to connect.
Beautiful. So go on to mindtribes.com.au and just jump and shoot me an email, info@mindtribes.com.au. Someone from our team will answer, or I'll answer directly. Or I'm a bit of a LinkedIn nut, so you can always send me a direct message on there. I do read it myself, and I do manage my own social media. So if there's something that interests you, jump on and let me know, or follow our Business in Color podcast there and send me a message about what you heard that made an impact, and we can start a conversation.
I'll put all of these links in the show notes, everyone. So please just follow those to guide you to whichever platform resonates with you the most, and connect with Divanisha Pillay on all of her incredible work. Do you like being called Divanisha? Or do you prefer?
I do, but it does make me sit up straight because I think my mother's calling me.
That's when someone says my name with a rolled R. I know I'm in trouble as well. Thank you so much, beautiful soul, for your time today here on this podcast. We definitely experienced the things you cannot unhear. So I hope it's caused you to make some positive shifts in your life, in your business, in your career, in your perception. Thank you again so much, Div.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the show. What did you think? And what did you feel? Let us know by leaving me a message on the Things You Can't Unhear Instagram community page. And if you can, give us some ratings love on your favourite listening platform.